Is Dubai expensive or is it cheap? The normal narrative is, of course, that Dubai is a very expensive place. However, I just had teams from two of my companies visiting for a little while, and they were providing the feedback that it was actually quite affordable. So, what gives? I'm going to cover that today, talking a little bit about what the realistic truth is. And there's a particular tweet that I read that I'm going to go over with you today. And it will kind of give some context and set the answer to this because the answer probably surprises you. So let's dive in and discuss that. Before we do, if you haven't already, please welcome. I'm Michael here from Offshore Citizen. And if you're interested in doing things like relocating to UAE or to other parts of the world, optimizing your global tax, etc., we help with that. So you can feel free to reach out to us. Okay, so obviously, for those of you who have not been, UAE, kind of glamorous, flashy, known for, expensive cars, etc. And certainly, driving around, you will probably see more Rolls Royces, Bentleys, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bugattis, etc. than you will perhaps anywhere else in the world. And as a result, it might give you the impression that things are expensive. But as I was saying, I recently had the team from one of my companies who were visiting. They had not been here before, and they've traveled around quite a bit, and we're making some comments that they're like, actually, it's pretty reasonable. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm gonna read you this tweet, which some people might find crazy, but anyway, I will read it as is, and I think I'm gonna put it into perspective for what you should probably think about when you're thinking about these different parts of the world. So, New York City Partners Salary Reality Check. I know I'm going to get shredded for this, but here it goes. I'm a second-year partner at a V50 firm in New York City, making around 850K, and it just doesn't feel like that much money. I don't mean that in an abstract sense. I mean that I genuinely don't feel like I'm living like somebody who makes 850K per year. Now, let's be clear. 850K for the vast majority of the world is a pretty good income, right? Certainly, one would expect that your quality of life should be quite high at that level. I have two kids, another on the way, and rent a two-bedroom in Carroll Gardens for $5,900 per month. My husband and I have been trying to buy a home that fits a family of five, but Brooklyn prices are insane. Anything semi-decent, move-in ready is either wildly unaffordable, especially at today's 7% interest rates, or in a neighborhood where private school would be a must, making it just as unaffordable. We've considered the suburbs, but anything truly worth coming home to after these long hours and within a 1.5 hour of my office is going to be 2 to 2.4 million minimum. With current mortgage rates and New Jersey Westchester property taxes, that's a $17,000 to $18,000 per month nut. My monthly draw is 21K. I know this sounds entitled insane, but I wanted to add another data point on what life is like in New York City as a big law partner. My sense is that partners before the 2010s could afford to actually live in New York City much sooner after making partner. While for me, that kind of financial breathing room feels a long way off. New York City is increasingly for the ultra rich or the poor, with the middle class, upper, middle, lower disappearing entirely. Okay, so why do I present this? I present this a little bit as a bit of a comparison point for people who are saying that UAE or Dubai is expensive. So let's kind of be clear. So if you were in, let's compare New York City in this example, and granted, New York City is, of course, an expensive city, right? But what would you be getting in New York City if you were in that situation versus what are you getting in Dubai if you're in that situation? Well, now this person is somebody who has two kids and they're adding a third. So right off the bat, you have an enormous advantage in UAE. Enormous. Why? Because childcare is quite inexpensive. You can have for probably $600 to $1,000 a month a full-time nanny. So I have good friends who have 3, 4 kids, and they have a nanny for each kid, right? That's what they do, and it makes it quite good for their lifestyle, etc. That would be just wildly unaffordable for most people in most parts of Europe, in lots of parts of the US, such as New York City, such as a place like San Francisco, LA, etc., etc. And part of the reason for that is that on top of the cost of that person, which would be much higher, you're also going to be in a situation where you need to pay for a much bigger place if they're going to be live-in, right? Now, the thing about UAE is places are not insanely inexpensive. That's what I would generally say. So if we say, is UAE cheap? Well, compared to Malaysia, it's not, right? Kuala Lumpur, let's be clear, is much cheaper than UAE is. Bulgaria is much cheaper than UAE is. A lot of parts of the world are much cheaper than Dubai is. That's because they're not first world cities, right? So if you're talking about tier one cities in first world countries, if you compare to London, to Paris, to New York City, to LA, et cetera, then it's a different comparison ground, okay? And by those standards, one of the things that I noticed that's quite interesting is it is very normal to have quite large homes in UAE. It's really normal that you have maids' rooms, that you have like 5, 6 bedrooms, that you have 5,000 plus square feet, etc. So these things are really, really normal if you were going to go and get a villa somewhere in Dubai. And because of that, that means that, well, you could have a chef, you could have a live-in maid, you could have a driver, you could have all these things. And these just meaningfully elevate your quality of life. Now, you could say, wow, I wouldn't have those, and so I need to kind of compare accordingly. Okay, that's fair. But for somebody as a family, that's a big deal. And here, if you're looking at the cost of schooling, they're saying, okay, true, in UAE, private school is, I find it to be fairly expensive, right? So if you're comparing somebody who needs to have private school versus somebody who does not, so let's say you're living in Denmark or something, and you're willing to, you've got a great public system that you can send your kids to, et cetera. Well, that's just a meaningful trade-off, right? So I know one of my chiropractors, for example, made the comment he had moved from Denmark and Sweden, and he commented that all things being equal, yes, he didn't pay taxes in UAE, but on the other hand, he didn't get the benefits, and things kind of worked out very similar for him. And so for him, there were cultural reasons that he thought UAE was more attractive right now, as well as some other things. And so that was a clear factor. But if you're not in that situation, if you're in a situation where you'd be in like somebody in the US, even though that person in the US actually is going to have to pay taxes in UAE, mostly the same as they're going to pay in the US. Okay, they can claim a foreign earned income exclusion and get a few benefits like that, but not massive differences. In spite of that, you might find that because of all these other benefits, you're actually making it up. Now let's talk about other things. So somebody told me the other day, uh, they were kind of looking at hotel prices. And the reality is that if you want to, you can get a hotel room for like 50 bucks a night, which is pretty inexpensive, right? Like a lot of parts of the world, you can't get a hotel room for 50 bucks a night. Now, is that a great hotel room? Absolutely not, right? So like, let's not pretend you're not staying in a 5-star hotel or something like that, but nor should you expect to for that kind of price. So I think that one of the things people get a little bit deceived by looking at cost in UAE is that the top is very high. So certainly this is an experience that I have. If I go and compare to most cities in the world, the most expensive real estate that you're going to get is maybe like $5 to $10 million. Go to most cities in Canada, the US, France, Spain, Italy, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty rare that you can find property that tops out over $10 million. In fact, in most places, it's quite a bit lower because you're talking about small communities, but that would be quite high. In UAE, the most expensive penthouse for sale right now is 750 million dirhams. Okay. Now, will they sell it for that? Who knows? But, you're loosely talking like around $200 million. That's a really high top line, right? If I go to Vancouver, which is an expensive city, generally speaking, for real estate, you don't have anything close to that. The most expensive penthouse in Vancouver, the last I checked, was like somewhere around 50 million, and those 50 million Canadian, which is a lot, right? Because this is a ton of money. Let's not pretend otherwise. But on the other hand, that place is not that big. So what you're getting for that price is not so comparable. And you're sitting there and it's still a tiny fraction of what it is that you'd pay for the top end here. I believe the most expensive unit to have sold in Dubai so far in terms of penthouses was $140 million, not dirhams, dollars. So like that's a lot, right? There's most places you just can't get that. And so this is the thing that I think is a little bit deceptive is people believe that because the top end is very high, that means everything is very high, but that's just not true. So let's compare, for example, the cost of Ubers, right? So first of all, let's recognize the quality of Ubers in Dubai is quite high. It's almost always Lexus. So you're not talking about some junky little car that's going to come randomly. They're generally going to come quite quickly, right? And, will take you pretty much anywhere. It's not abnormal that a typical place that you would go costs you like maybe $10, okay? So now if you were to compare this to taxis in Thailand or taxis in somewhere in Egypt or something like that, yes, this is expensive. But if I was to compare to being in Vancouver or being in Toronto or being in New York or being in Denver or being in Miami or be a bunch of these places, actually you find that it's actually cheaper, right? And this is partially due to the fact that there's lower wages. It's partially due to the fact that you have lower cost of fuel. Bottom line is that portion of things is less expensive. Now, public transit is less accessible in Dubai versus in certain other cities. Like, so if you're in London, the tube system is quite good. If you're at the metro system in Paris, it's quite good. Various cities have pretty good public transit, and then other ones obviously have some drop off from there. Bottom line is, it's not necessarily the main mode of transportation for everyone, but it's pretty reasonable if you're in that situation. If you're talking about, like, can you get something, this person in the example was paying $5,900 a month. So can you spend much, much, much more than that in Dubai? Of course you can. You can spend a lot more than that. Insanely more than that, in fact. But do you need to spend a lot more than that? No, you could get places for much cheaper than that. I don't particularly find in most cases that there is a lot in, say, like the city center, so the downtown area, that is especially uh, like low cost, right? So I wouldn't expect you to find $1,000 apartment or something like that in the city center. But on the other hand, it's not like it's totally absurd. One of the things that I found quite surprising was some of the food. And so, again, one of the people who works for one of our companies happens to go to a grocery store. Now, he's used to spending time in the Caribbean. He's used to being in a bunch of other areas. And he was commenting that actually, compared to a lot of these Western countries, he found the groceries to be quite affordable. Now, I find that's a little bit hit and miss. There's certainly a lot of overpriced or expensive groceries in Dubai, but it goes to show you a little bit how a bunch of the prices have gone up. There are plenty of places if you want to eat for quite inexpensive that you can do so. Again, are there insanely expensive places? Yes, Sublimotion, which is, it was, I believe, in Saint-Tropez, the most expensive restaurant in the world, or so it was marketed as. They have that in Dubai. There's a bunch of other restaurants like that. So you can absolutely go and spend, $1,000 on a dinner or night out or something like that. You can absolutely do that. But do you need to? No, absolutely not. Could you go and eat for pretty reasonable amounts of money? Yes, you can. And so, all right, well, that counts for something. This is like generally the case. And so, while I wouldn't say that Dubai is cheap, like I said, it's not someplace like Kuala Lumpur, which actually is like absurdly good value for the money. Uh, your ability to afford things if you want to, especially once you take into account things like taxes, is pretty good for a lot of people. Now, what you might argue is you might say, yeah, but I don't come to Dubai to live that lifestyle. That's fair. That's a personal choice, right? But honestly, even if you're in a situation where you're wanting to live a pretty good lifestyle, I mean, this person's talking about $850,000 a year. I can tell you, you can live an absurdly great lifestyle in Dubai for a lot less than $850,000 a year. I would say that for most people, if you don't have kids, somewhere between 10 and 15 grand a month is probably going to give you quite a decent lifestyle. So that kind of gives you some ballpark. I think that if you're under $5,000 a month, then you're probably not benefiting from a bunch of the things that are supposedly making Dubai great, right? So that's a different trade-off. But if you're just wanting to get by, can you absolutely be in Dubai and save money and things like that? Yes, you absolutely can. Can you go and enjoy like a lot of this stuff if you're having, a low six-figure salary? Yes, you can. And then the flip side is that all the stuff that is available to you is just not available in most places. So it doesn't matter. There is no amount of money that you can make. Like, you could be a multi-deca billionaire and living in a bunch of the world, and it would be impossible for you to get the lifestyle that you have in UAE simply because of this incredible ecosystem of stuff. And you can do that without having to be a multi-deca billionaire. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let me know you guys' thoughts. If you are interested in a place that you can go where you can have a low cost of living and high quality of life, we've created a guide. You can check it out in the comments below. We'll put it in the description as well as in the first comments. And it is all about 10 places that you can go where you can have a great quality of life and save a bunch of money. And so we'd encourage you to go and download that. And if you're interested in services, then please go to offshorecitizen.net and reach out to us. And I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.